Hey there, car enthusiasts. Today we're diving into one of the most frustrating automotive topics out there. We're talking about lighting systems that were so poorly designed, they make you wonder if the engineers ever actually drove at night. If you love learning about automotive disasters and engineering failures, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on content like this. Let's get right into it. First up, we have the Acura TL 4th generation with its jewel eye headlights. Now, on paper, these sounded innovative and futuristic. Multiple LED elements creating a distinctive look that would turn heads. But in reality, they were an absolute nightmare. The light output was pathetically weak, leaving drivers squinting into the darkness on unlit roads. And when one of those LEDs failed, get ready to shell out serious cash because you couldn't just replace a bulb. You had to replace the entire assembly, often costing over $1,000. Style over substance taken to its most ridiculous extreme. The Pontiac Aztek deserves a spot on this list, and honestly, it could make a worst of list for just about any automotive category. Those vertically stacked headlights weren't just ugly, they were functionally terrible. The positioning created weird beam patterns that left dark spots right where you needed light most. Drivers complained about poor visibility, and the plastic housings would fog up and yellow within just a few years, making an already bad situation even worse. It's like they deliberately chose the worst possible configuration. Moving on to the Dodge Caliber and its optional automatic headlight system. Automatic headlights should be foolproof, right? Well, Dodge found a way to mess it up spectacularly. The sensor was so poorly calibrated that it would turn the lights on and off at random times, often leaving drivers without illumination when they actually needed it. Going through a tunnel? Lights might stay off. Driving in broad daylight? Lights randomly kick on. The system was so unreliable that most owners just gave up and switched to manual control, defeating the entire purpose of the feature. The Nissan Juke had those split-level headlamps that seemed designed by someone who'd never heard of ergonomics. The actual low-beam headlights were positioned like way down near the bumper, while the position lights sat up high where normal headlights should be. This created a bizarre appearance and worse, terrible illumination. The low mounting position meant they'd get covered in road grime within minutes of driving in wet conditions. They'd also get damaged by road debris more easily. Form following dysfunction. Let's talk about the Chrysler PT Cruiser and those retro-styled headlights that looked cute but performed horribly. The rounded lenses and reflector design created serious glare for oncoming traffic while somehow simultaneously providing inadequate light for the actual driver. It was the worst of both worlds. You'd get flashed by angry drivers thinking you had your high beams on, while you're sitting there barely able to see the road ahead. The sealed beam design also meant expensive replacements when they inevitably failed. The Hummer H2 had massive headlight assemblies that looked impressive but were shockingly inadequate for such a large vehicle. Despite their size, the actual light output was pathetic, especially considering this was supposed to be an off-road capable vehicle. The beam pattern was narrow and didn't spread wide enough, leaving the sides of the road in complete darkness. For a vehicle that weighed 3 tons and could barely stop, having terrible visibility was a dangerous combination that put everyone at risk. The Subaru Tribeca first generation featured aircraft-inspired lighting that was trying way too hard to be different. Those narrow, slit-like headlights looked bizarre and provided inadequate illumination for a family SUV. The unique shape meant limited space for the actual lighting elements, resulting in dim output that left drivers struggling on dark roads. When Subaru redesigned the front end, they couldn't ditch those headlights fast enough. Even the manufacturer knew they'd made a massive mistake. The Smart Fortwo had tiny headlights to match its tiny body, but proportionality doesn't work that way with safety equipment. These miniature lights provided laughably poor illumination, which was especially problematic given that the car was already hard to see and vulnerable in traffic. The small reflector area meant weak beam projection, and the plastic lenses would scratch and cloud easily, further reducing what little output they had. Cute doesn't cut it when you're trying to see at night. The Chevrolet SSR had retractable headlights that seemed cool in theory, but were an engineering disaster. These motorized flip-up lights would fail regularly, leaving drivers with non-functional headlights and hefty repair bills. The motors would burn out, the mechanisms would jam, and the seals would fail, allowing water into the housings. When they did work, the light output was mediocre at best. Retractable headlights are cool on a sports car from the 80s, not on a confused pickup truck convertible from the 2000s. The Lexus SC430 had those teardrop-shaped adaptive headlights that cost a fortune and worked poorly. The adaptive system was supposed to swivel the lights as you turned, improving cornering visibility. Instead, the system was slow to react, often pointing the wrong direction and failed frequently. Repairs could cost thousands because of the complex motors and sensors involved. You were literally paying extra money for worse performance. Only luxury car manufacturers could get away with that kind of nonsense. The Mitsubishi i-MiEV electric car had some of the worst headlights ever fitted to a modern vehicle. These tiny circular lights looked like something from a cartoon character, but illuminated like a candle in a windstorm. For an electric car that was already range limited, having terrible lighting meant you definitely didn't want to drive it at night. The beam pattern was narrow and short, making highway driving genuinely dangerous. It's almost like they spent the entire budget on the electric drivetrain and had $5 left for lighting. The Volkswagen Beetle convertible of the late 90s and early 2000s had those rounded headlights that fit the retro aesthetic but were functionally terrible. The curved lenses would distort the beam pattern, creating uneven illumination with dark spots and bright spots in all the wrong places. They'd also fog up internally due to poor sealing, and the bulb access was ridiculously complicated, requiring partial disassembly just for a simple bulb change. Retro styling shouldn't mean retro performance. The Saturn Ion had dashboard-mounted warning lights that you could barely see in daylight, but were focusing on their horizontal headlights that were absolutely dreadful. The wide, flat design looked modern but created terrible light distribution. The outer portions of the beam were weak, and the pattern was inconsistent. These lights were also prone to moisture intrusion, causing corrosion and failure. For a budget car, having to replace headlight assemblies frequently was an added expense owners didn't need. But the Scion XB first generation had those square headlights that matched its boxy design, but failed at their primary job. The flat lenses and basic reflector design created weak, unfocused beams that barely lit up the road ahead. For young buyers who were the target market, many of whom were new drivers, having poor visibility was particularly problematic. The lights also sat fairly low, making them vulnerable to damage and quick to get dirty in bad weather conditions. The Pontiac Sunfire had composite headlights that would haze over faster than any other car on the market. Within just a couple of years, these lights would turn so yellow and cloudy that light output was reduced by half or more. Restoration kits barely helped, and replacement assemblies weren't cheap for what was supposed to be an affordable car. The reflector coating inside would also deteriorate, further reducing what little light made it through the foggy lenses. It was a ticking time bomb from day one. The Chevrolet HHR borrowed the retro design language from the PT Cruiser and unfortunately borrowed similarly terrible lighting. Those round headlamps provided poor illumination and created glare problems for other drivers. The cutoff line was poorly defined, meaning the beam would shine up into oncoming drivers' eyes while leaving your own road dark. The housings were also prone to taking on water, leading to bulb failures and internal corrosion that would ruin the reflectors. The Isuzu Via-Cross had funky styling throughout, and the headlights were no exception. These angular units looked aggressive but performed timidly. The beam pattern was narrow and short, inadequate for a vehicle marketed for adventure and off-road use. For something that was supposed to go off the beaten path, having lighting that barely handled normal roads was a critical failure. The unusual shape also meant that upgrades and replacements were expensive and hard to find. The Kia Soul first generation came with headlights that were as quirky as the vehicle itself, but quirky doesn't mean good. These lights had serious issues with aiming from the factory, often pointing too low or at odd angles. Getting them properly adjusted was difficult, and they'd often drift out of alignment with normal driving. The bulb life was also surprisingly short, with many owners reporting frequent replacements. For a car marketed as fun and practical, constantly dealing with lighting issues wasn't fun at all. The Plymouth Prowler was a retro hot rod that looked amazing but had headlights pulled straight from the parts bin of much cheaper vehicles. These basic units were completely inadequate for a performance vehicle. The low mounting position meant they'd get obscured by the slightest road grime, and the light output was weak and poorly focused. For a car that could hit serious speeds, having lighting that belonged on a budget sedan was a dangerous mismatch of capabilities. The Chevrolet Avalanche had an innovative midgate but uninnovative terrible lighting. These large headlight assemblies looked substantial but were prone to moisture problems that would cause premature bulb failure and reflector damage. The light output was also surprisingly weak for such a large truck. The beam pattern left significant dark spots, and the automatic leveling system would malfunction, causing the lights to point at random angles. Towing a trailer at night became an adventure in limited visibility. The Ford Escape first generation had headlights that would develop condensation problems almost immediately. Water would get trapped inside the housings, creating a foggy mess that dramatically reduced light output. The seals were poorly designed, and Ford never issued an effective fix. Owners would have to regularly remove and dry out their headlight assemblies, which isn't something you should have to do with a vehicle that's supposed to be ready for all weather conditions. It was a quality control disaster. The Chrysler Crossfire had those aggressive angular headlights that looked mean but illuminated meekly. The projector beam headlights that came standard were dim and had a very sharp cutoff that limited visibility. While a defined cutoff is good for preventing glare, this was excessive, leaving you unable to see road signs until you were right on top of them. The HID upgrade option helped, but was expensive and still didn't fully solve the poor design of the housing and reflector system. The Cadillac XLR had vertical stacked headlights that were supposed to evoke classic Cadillac design but instead evoked frustration. The lower actual headlight units were positioned poorly and provided inadequate light for a performance luxury car. The auto-leveling system was overly complex and would fail, leaving the lights aimed at the ground or up into the sky. Repairs were expensive because everything was integrated into complex electronic systems. You were paying luxury car prices for subpar illumination. The Jeep Compass first generation had those round headlights trying to invoke classic Jeep styling, but failing at basic functionality. The beam pattern was inconsistent with hot spots and dark areas, and the light output was weak overall. For a vehicle marketed as capable of light off-roading, having lighting that barely handled paved roads was disappointing. The housings were also prone to UV damage, causing the lenses to yellow and crack prematurely, especially in sunny climates. Finally, we have the Nissan Cube with its asymmetrical everything, including problematic lighting. While the wraparound rear window got most of the attention, the front headlights were quietly terrible. The beam pattern was as weird as the car's styling, with uneven distribution and poor distance projection. The unique shape meant aftermarket upgrades were nearly impossible to find, leaving owners stuck with inadequate factory lighting. For a car that was all about being different, having lights that didn't work well was one difference nobody wanted. There you have it, 25 of the worst lighting systems ever installed on production vehicles. These examples prove that good lighting isn't just about looks or innovation. It's about fundamental functionality and safety. Engineers need to remember that headlights have one job: illuminate the road so drivers can see and be seen. When that basic requirement gets sacrificed for style, cost-cutting, or misguided innovation, everyone on the road suffers. If you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive lighting failures, make sure you're subscribed so you catch all our future content. Drop a comment below telling us which terrible lighting system you've had the misfortune of experiencing, or if we missed any particularly awful examples. Thanks for watching, and remember, always keep your lights on and your visibility high. Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to dig a little deeper into why manufacturers keep making these same mistakes over and over again. It's fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. You see, the automotive industry is under constant pressure to reduce costs and meet emissions standards, and somehow lighting always seems to be the place where corners get cut. Engineers might have brilliant ideas for aerodynamics or fuel efficiency, but then the bean counters come in and slash the lighting budget by 30%. And suddenly we get these disasters we've been talking about. There's also this weird obsession with making everything look futuristic or trendy without considering the actual physics of how light works. A headlight isn't just a piece of jewelry for your car's face, it's a critical safety component that needs to meet specific standards for brightness, beam pattern, and consistency. You can't just make it look cool and call it a day. Yet somehow designers keep trying to push the boundaries of what a headlight should look like, and engineers are forced to make it work within those constraints, often with compromised results. Another thing that really gets me is the sealed beam design that some manufacturers insist on using. Once one small component fails, the whole assembly becomes garbage. You can't just swap out a bulb anymore on some of these vehicles. The entire housing has to go, which is wasteful and expensive for consumers. It's penny wise and pound foolish, and it shows a complete disregard for the actual user experience. Modern technology could easily solve this problem, but instead we get stuck with designs that prioritize manufacturing convenience over customer satisfaction. The moisture intrusion issue we saw in several of these vehicles is particularly egregious because it's such a basic engineering problem that's been solved countless times. Proper sealing isn't rocket science, it's not expensive. It's just a matter of actually caring about quality and durability. When manufacturers knowingly install headlight assemblies that will fog up and fail within a few years, that's not an accident or an oversight. That's a calculated decision that the cost of failures and warranty claims will be lower than the cost of proper sealing materials and quality control. It's infuriating when you think about it. What's really interesting is that some of the worst offenders were supposedly premium or luxury vehicles. You'd think that buying a more expensive car would at least guarantee adequate lighting, but that's clearly not the case. Sometimes the worst systems were in vehicles that cost significantly more money. Owners felt especially robbed because they paid extra for features and quality that apparently didn't extend to something as fundamental as being able to see the road at night. That's a breach of consumer trust that should be taken more seriously. The automatic headlight systems that were implemented incorrectly, like the one in the Dodge Caliber, represent another category of failure that's particularly annoying. The technology itself is sound and useful, but when it's executed poorly, it's worse than useless. At least with a manual system, the driver has complete control. With a broken automatic system, you're fighting against your own car, trying to override a system that's actively working against your safety. That's not progress. That's regression dressed up as innovation. Looking at all these examples collectively, you start to see patterns emerge. Poor beam distribution is incredibly common, which suggests that manufacturers are using reflector designs that are either too simple or poorly optimized. Moisture problems are also surprisingly widespread, which points to inadequate sealing and ventilation design. Premature lens degradation and fogging indicates cheap materials or insufficient UV protection. These aren't unique problems that just happen to occur occasionally. These are systemic issues that suggest a lack of proper testing and quality assurance across multiple manufacturers and multiple decades. The economic impact on consumers is also worth considering. We're not just talking about inconvenience here, we're talking about real money. Some of these headlight replacements cost over $1,000 per side. That's more expensive than the headlights on many brand new economy cars. A single accident caused by poor visibility could cost thousands in vehicle damage and potentially more in medical bills. The insurance implications alone are significant. Poor lighting increases accident risk, which increases claims, which increases everyone's insurance premiums. The real cost of these terrible lighting systems extends far beyond the sticker price of replacement assemblies. Safety is really the core issue here, and it's something that shouldn't be compromised for any reason. A driver who can't see the road adequately is a danger to themselves and everyone else. We have regulations and standards for headlights, but apparently those standards aren't strict enough or aren't being enforced rigorously enough. There needs to be real consequences for manufacturers who knowingly install inadequate lighting systems. Whether that's through increased liability, stricter regulations, or public pressure, something needs to change because the status quo clearly isn't working. Looking forward, I'm cautiously optimistic that LED and laser lighting technology will force manufacturers to either get it right or face consumer backlash. These new technologies are more efficient and can be designed into smaller packages, which might finally break the cycle of terrible lighting design. They're also more expensive initially, which might shift the calculus away from cost-cutting and toward proper engineering. Some manufacturers are already proving that excellent lighting is possible, even at reasonable price points. So there's no excuse for the others to keep failing. The transition to electric vehicles might also be an opportunity to reset expectations of buyings around lighting. New platforms don't carry the baggage of legacy design constraints. So manufacturers could potentially design lighting systems from the ground up with proper attention to functionality. Of course, they could also repeat all the same mistakes with new technology, but perhaps the industry has learned enough lessons that they'll make better choices going forward. What I hope you take away from this video is an understanding of just how important headlights really are. They deserve serious engineering attention, proper testing, and quality materials. When you're shopping for a vehicle, pay attention to the lighting system. Look at reviews specifically mentioning visibility and beam pattern. Don't just assume that a newer car automatically has better lights than an older one, because clearly that's not always true. Be an informed consumer and vote with your wallet by choosing vehicles from manufacturers who actually care about this stuff. To everyone out there who's been stuck with one of these terrible lighting systems, you have my sympathy. You paid good money for your vehicle and you deserve to be able to see the road at night. If you're experiencing visibility issues, don't just accept it. Document the problem, reach out to other owners, and make noise on social media. Manufacturers respond to consumer pressure, and the more people who speak up about these issues, the more likely they are to prioritize improvements in the future. If you found this exploration of automotive lighting failures informative, entertaining, or just cathartic after your own experiences with bad lights, please consider subscribing to the channel. We cover all kinds of automotive topics, from engineering disasters to bizarre design choices to the history of forgotten vehicles. There's always something interesting to explore in the world of cars, and we'd love to have you along for the ride. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a new video, and check out some of our other content if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and remember to keep your headlights clean and properly aimed.